Today I will be talking about American Sign Language. American Sign Language is not something we are exposed to in our everyday lives, but plays a big role in how people with hearing loss communicate. American Sign Language has been believed to have been around for more than 200 years and has only had slight changes made to the language. My sources have been published in the past few years and include qualified studies to back up the information provided. Throughout my speech, I will cover who is a part of the deaf community, additional modes of communication for people with hearing loss, and the importance of manual signs and non-manual movements when signing ASL. First, I will cover the background information on American Sign Language. So what is American Sign Language and who associates with the deaf community? The National Institution of Deafness and Other Communication Disorders writes in the article titled American Sign Language. American Sign Language, ASL, is a complete complex language that employs signs made by moving the hands combined with facial expressions and postures of the body. Although ASL is believed to have been around for more than 200 years, the exact date it was created is unknown. One thing we do know about American Sign Language is it is derived from the earliest form of sign language, French Sign Language, which isn't used anymore, but aspects of this language carry on in modern ASL today. The article goes on to explain how ASL compares with spoken language, how most children learn ASL, why emphasize audiological early language learning is important, and what research is being done on ASL and other sign languages. Next, who associates with the deaf community? When I asked the class the difference between deaf, and hard of hearing, 45% said they didn't know the difference. 22% said there wasn't a difference, and 33% tried explaining the difference, but nobody ended up with the right answer. Although these words may seem to mean the same thing to people who don't know a lot about the deaf and ASL community, these words have a significant difference in how someone who has hearing loss communicates. The author of the article, Community and Culture, Frequently Asked Questions, explains, we use lowercase deaf when referring to the audiological condition of not hearing, and the uppercase deaf when referring to a particular group of deaf people who share a language or American Sign Language and a culture. When talking about people who are hard of hearing, a clear definition of this expression is hard to define. The author goes on to say, HOH people can be allies of the deaf community. They can choose to join or ignore it. They can participate in social, political, and legal life of the community along with central deaf or live their lives completely with the parameters of the hearing world. So this is basically saying that people who are hard of hearing have the choice, well, anybody has a choice of whether they want to use ASL or not. Now that you have an understanding of what ASL is and who uses it, I will be explaining the other common modes of communication used by people with hearing loss. The first mode of communication is Pidgin Sign English. The authors of the article, Family-Centered Practices and American Sign Language, ASL, challenges the recommendations state. Pidgin Sign English, or PSE, is known as contact signing and typically features the sentence structure of English in addition to aspects of ASL. And PSE is more commonly used when communicating with hearing people who are unfamiliar with ASL. So basically the picture explains that Pidgin signing is like a combination of ASL. In English, it uses the structure of English but the signals of ASL. Next is the auditory and oral communication. The same article states, auditory oral communication is used when a person who is deaf employs his or her residual hearing and the use of listening technology. These include hearing aids and cochlear implants. And they use these to produce and understand spoken language. The author also states, auditory oral users typically participate in speech therapy to listen and produce spoken languages to that of their same age. So at a young age, they usually go in and start learning how to use their cochlear implants or hearing aids to better communicate with people who don't have hearing problems. Okay, so the last two modes of communication are lip reading and code switching. Lip reading in this article is described as speech reading. This communication strategy involves the person looking at the mouth of the speaker to understand what is being said. Code switching associates with ASL and means facilitating a communicative interaction between two individuals who do not share a common language. So code switching is basically say I'm doing ASL and someone doesn't understand it, then I could switch to doing more things like pointing and what's easier to help understand each other. So the article provides an example of this code switching by saying, when a deaf person stops signing and begins voicing in English or begins signing in a more English-based system to facilitate communication for someone who is not fluent in ASL. After learning a little bit more about the alternative forms of communication deaf people may use, I'm jumping back to the topic of ASL and how non-manual and manual signs play a key factor in effective ASL signing. So the importance of manual signs and non-manual movements. When talking about learning ASL, most people only think about the manual movements or signs needed to communicate. While the correct signing of these movements is important, one of the key parts of communicating through ASL is using body language, hand shape and movement, facial expressions, and more. In the article titled Ask and Tell as well, question-answer clauses in American Sign Language, the authors express the meaningful movements and importance of signing. The voice that ASL is a language produced through movements of parts of the body perceived through a visual system. Meaningful movements can be divided into two categories: manual signs produced using the hands and non-manual movements produced with the rest of the body. The article Non-Manual Signs Used in Sign Language explains the non-manual signs included in ASL in more depth. Non-manual signs, or NMS, are grammatical and somatic features other than hands. They include mouth morphs, eye gazes, facial expressions, body shifting, and head tilting. When talking about what to include when using ASL, you can refer back to what is called the 5 parameters. These include hand shapes, movement, location, palm orientation, and non-manual signs. Throughout my speech, I covered who is a part of the deaf community, additional modes of communication for people with hearing loss, and the importance of manual signs and non-manual movements. After listening to my speech, I hope you learned something new about the deaf community and have a better understanding of what it has to offer. So thank you for listening to my speech.